I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President Trump praised his tax overhaul law at a manufacturing company in Ohio, telling workers that, quote, America is once again open for business. Trump pointed to economic gains during his first year as president. He also tweeted that people's taxes, quote, are going way down and U.S. factories are coming back. California Congressman Adam Schiff was the latest target for the president on Twitter. Trump accused the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee of being one of the biggest liars and leakers in Washington. Schiff was highly critical of President Trump during the fight over that controversial GOP memo. American troops have started to pull out of Iraq. The drawdown marks a shift in priorities for the U.S. and comes following Baghdad's declaration of victory over Islamic State last year. It also comes about 3 months ahead of Iraqi national elections. Fresh off their stunning upset over the New England Patriots, the triumphant Eagles arrived in Philadelphia today, greeted by adoring fans. The underdog Eagles beat the Patriots 41-33 last night for their first Super Bowl championship in franchise history. A victory parade is set for Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Uber and Waymo finally collide in court. We will take you into the courtroom on the first day of Silicon Valley's trial of the year. Plus, crypto crash. Bitcoin falls below $7,000, coming further off its December peak. We will track the biggest collapse in the digital currency market since Bloomberg began tracking prices. And Samsung's heir apparent walks. How J.Y. Lee was set free less than a year after his bribery conviction. But first, to our lead. Silicon Valley's trial of the year officially underway. Lawyers made their opening statements Monday in the most highly anticipated case, Waymo versus Uber. Lawyers for both sides made their case in the lawsuit that accuses Uber of stealing Waymo's proprietary self-driving technology to kickstart its own attempt to get an autonomous driving unit going. Joining us now from San Francisco, our go-to legal team at Bloomberg News, Joel Rosenblatt and Matt Larson, legal analysts for Bloomberg Intelligence. Both of you were at the trial today. So, Joel, I'll start with you. Break it down. John Krafcik, CEO of Waymo, the first on the stand today. What happened?
Yeah, John Krafcik was started, and he started off kind of explaining, narrating, somewhat strangely, I thought, a video of Waymo cars kind of making their way through the suburbs of Phoenix to kind of explain for the jury what's going on. He was confronted by an email, so his testimony was that he was surprised by Anthony Lewandowski, the engineer at the center of the lawsuit, leaving. Resigning, but then he was confronted with a lawsuit, with an email 1 year previous to that, to his resignation, showing that he shouldn't have been surprised at all. And so this is kind of hammering home a point that Uber wants to make, that Waymo brought this suit to maybe restrain and keep employees, that they were paranoid about people leaving.
So, Matt, it's interesting. I know you actually have personal experience with both of these legal teams as a litigator in your former career. Talk to us about who's on each side here.
Sure. So, both sides have top quality legal counsel here. You've got a litigation team from Quinn Emanuel on one side, openings and arguments from Sussman Godfrey on the other. These are trial lawyers. Their expertise is to break down complex legal matters and present them to a jury. A lot of what we see at trial is very narrative based. There are stories that both sides are hammering home. On the Waymo, Quinn Emanuel side, the story is going to be Uber cheated. They looked for cheat codes and shortcuts. On the Uber side, they're trying to distract away. They're going to point out where Waymo maybe isn't telling the whole story, try to provide some additional context, and point out that these companies are really competitors, and this trial is as much about generating FUD, about trying to hide the ball, and really just kind of drag down a competitor in a very public square. So, both sides have documents to back up their back up their claims. They're going to be, interviewing and putting some key witnesses on the stand, some pretty big names. We'll see the heavy hitters from both Google and Uber up on the stand, and it'll be up to these jurors to really make sense of it and try to figure out which narrative resonates most and which one rings true through all the evidence that's going to be presented through trial.
And Joel, Travis Kalanick, the former CEO of Uber, is up soon. When are we expecting him to testify?
It looks like he'll be up tomorrow. You never know kind of how long each witness is going to spend on the stand, but he will most likely testify tomorrow. Waymo came at him early and pretty hard in terms of kind of tagging him with being the mastermind of this alleged trade secrets theft. So he's going to be on the stand for a long time, and he's going to have a very tough examination, and then it'll be up to a cross-examination to try to kind of push that back. We expect him tomorrow. It could be Wednesday.
So, Matt, do you have a sense of, knowing both sides, knowing the cases that they have, who's got a better argument here?
It's going to be a close call. Both stories that are presented at trial are very convincing. It's difficult to really read what the jury is thinking, but there seemed to be some sympathy, at least in opening arguments, with some of the themes that Waymo was throwing out there. But on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of key evidence that Uber brings up in terms of the history of Lewandowski, in terms of some of the business influences that gave rise to this litigation being filed. It's difficult to say. I think that at least in a lot of reports, that Waymo has kind of gotten ahead of the issue at trial, but we may see some subtleties that ultimately push the jury to not give a full victory to Waymo. So my initial sense is that we're going to see a little bit of a divided result here. Maybe it favors a little bit more in the Uber camp, but kind of no matter what happens, the loser will lodge an appeal, and both sides will likely claim some form of victory. That's assuming that the case doesn't settle before a verdict comes out.
Well, Waymo is asking for $1.9 billion in damages. Joel, this is a company that still hasn't gone public. They do have a $70 billion valuation, but would a fine like that or a penalty like that completely cripple Uber?
I don't think so. I don't think the money's really kind of ever been the issue in this case. So, of course, the parties won't say that, and it's a lot of money for any normal human being. But as you know, in Silicon Valley, that's not a lot of money. And again, it's not the money. If Waymo wins, what they'll win is possibly an injunction, a court order blocking Uber from using this technology at issue. Now, even that might not matter. Uber argues, they've already said, we've done a design around anything that might kind of use these trade secrets, so we won't be hobbled or hurt at all by this. So it remains to be seen. But this is really about the technology, and this is really about, there's an emotional kind of issue here more than anything about theft and kind of a backstabbing deal. Did Uber do this to Waymo and Larry Page and Google?
All right, Bloomberg's Joel Rosenblatt and Matt Larson, you are going to be keeping us apprised day by day as this trial continues. Thank you both for giving us that update from San Francisco. Sticking with Uber, another lawsuit against the company has come to a close. The victim of a sexual assault by an Uber driver in India is dismissing her suit against the company after a judge agreed to private mediation in September. The victim, who remains anonymous, sued Uber in San Francisco federal court in June over claims that executives acquired her medical records without her consent. The woman said her driver raped her in December 2014 after she fell asleep in the back of the car. Coming up, after facing threats and harassment online, Brianna Wu decided to take what she knows about the tech industry and run for Congress to fight for the rights of online users in Washington. We will speak with her next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. In deal news, Comcast could consider topping Disney's bid for Fox, but no decision has been made, this according to a report from CNBC. Shares of Comcast declined while Fox moved higher. Disney is also said to be preparing for a response in case Comcast makes a bid. Over the last year, big tech firms stand accused of transgressions such as selling campaign ads to shadowy Russian groups and not doing enough to fight harassment and threats on their own platforms. Brianna Wu, who worked in the video game industry and is now running for Congress in Massachusetts' 8th District, is here to explain how she wants to make change in tech, and she knows from personal experience how vicious the trolls can be. Brianna, you played a critical role in my new book that is out this week, Brotopia, Breaking Up the Boys Club of Silicon Valley, and I'm so happy you're here because you're such an important part of this story and a whole chapter on online trolling.
I just want to thank you. You really have written one of the very best books on Silicon Valley that's ever been out there. And I picked it up and I finished it in one sitting. It was just amazing.
Thank you. Well, it means a lot to hear that, especially from you, knowing that you have lived through it all. You know, let's take us back to Gamergate because, you know, some people may not remember just how bad it was.
Right.
This, you know, was a few years ago, and, you know, suddenly you had what seemed to be the entire gaming industry attacking you.
It was really harsh. You know, the summer leading up to Gamergate, what happened is the forces that became the alt-right, they found a playbook to silence any woman in the game industry that they didn't like. They would go after her career, they would critique her, they would send her threats, they would, you know, basically try to get her fired from her job. And this was happening left and right to my friends. And then, you know, I realized that the men in our field were not going to speak out for the women that were being run out. I had many back channel conversations asking them to do the right thing, and they wouldn't. So what I learned during Gamergate is I kind of had to do the right thing myself. It led to, you know, there's no good way to have a Law and Order episode made about you, but you know, that's what happened with all the threats I got.
You were getting threats on Twitter and Facebook. I mean,
in real life, absolutely.
Right. Physical threats.
Physical threats. I had people, you know, throw a brick through the window of my home. Just a few days ago, I had somebody outside my home, my new home, taking pictures and sending me.
So you're still getting harassed as a result of Gamergate breaking out 4 years ago?
Yes, absolutely. It just, we had a thing with Nolan Bushnell losing an award this week for his sexist past. This is the man that founded Atari, and I had spoken out about that. And, you know, the death threats and rape threats are back again. It's exhausting to deal with.
I do know that Nolan Bushnell issued an apology.
He did?
You know, one of the things that I talk about in the book is, you know, what if women had been more involved in creating these products like Twitter and Facebook from the very beginning? And Ev Williams, a co-founder of Twitter, told me that he thinks online harassment and trolling might not be such a problem. In fact, wouldn't be such a problem today if there had been more women on the early team. He said, we just weren't thinking about it. You know, they were thinking about wonderful and amazing things that could be done with Twitter, not how easily it could be used to hurl death threats.
Absolutely.
Do you think that having more women in the design of, let's say, Twitter or Facebook or Reddit, that online harassment would not exist today?
I wouldn't say it wouldn't exist because it would exist in different forms. But, you know, if you don't have people at the table that have different problems, like putting their input into a product, it's going to be a worse product. Like the tech industry creates products that work for a very small segment of the population. And it doesn't work very well for me, and I would guess very well for you. So I think, you know, it's not just the harassment. There's a larger business case to be made here. You know, in my industry, video games, women make up more than half of the audience of gamers these days. We're a sliver of the people actually running game studios. And there's so much money that we're leaving on the table.
So what do you think of the changes that Twitter and Facebook have made more recently?
I would say for me personally, I think Twitter has done a lot of work that doesn't get credited. I personally, I see the filters they put in place to like stop me from seeing the death threats. So I do appreciate that. I think they've taken steps, but you know, there's still a long way to go.
So Twitter, Facebook, Google have recently been called before Congress, you know, and the issues are wide-ranging from fake news to Russian meddling in the election to disturbing content to online harassment and trolling. Do you think that these companies can self-regulate, or do lawmakers need to step in here?
Well, I think that's the worst case scenario if Congress has to step in. You know, I say that as someone who is running for Congress. You know, in my field, video games in the 90s, there's a really interesting historical example that violence in video games was completely unregulated. It was just the Wild West. So Congress came and held some hearings, and as a result of those hearings, the Video Game Industry instituted the ESRB, which basically put ratings on games like in movies so consumers could see those ratings and make an informed decision if that was right for their child, or maybe they're an adult and they want to play what they want. That was a best case scenario, but that only happened because Congress got involved with that. So I do believe that Congress has a role in solving, like this issue with fake news, basically campaign interference, harassment. I do want to see us be more proactive there.
And I know that's part of your platform is helping to protect users. Are there laws currently that if you get attacked online, there's actual recourse? Like, is it illegal to do that?
So I've spoken with Danielle Citron. She's the world's most preeminent legal expert on this subject, and it is. But it's worth noting, the tools we have for this are laws that were written in the 90s. And the world has changed a lot since the 1990s. So we need a Congress that can come in and write those laws, and more importantly, fund divisions of the FBI that can actually go look at these crimes and prosecute them. Due to Freedom of Information requests, we had people that sent me the most explicit, horrific death threats you can imagine, confessed to the FBI, but they chose not to bring that to trial and prosecute those people. So we need to, I believe, fund a certain division of the FBI that's going to look into those kind of extreme cases online and, make them meet the justice system.
How different do you think the gaming industry would be if women had been more involved in creating the games from the start?
It would be, we'd have better games. We'd have much better games. Do you know how bored I am with first-person shooters where you go kill 1 million people and then get an ending screen? No, we would have much better games. We'd have better stories. We'd have better characters. We'd be making more money. The game industry is sick, and we are not in a really great place right now. So
how much progress has been made since Gamergate?
None. I really wish I could sit here and tell you we had. And when I stood up to Gamergate, I did it because I believed the men in our field would do the right thing and change. But we just haven't seen it. With the Me Too movement right now, the only consequences we've seen for that in my field is one editor-in-chief fired about it and one freelancer fired, and Nolan Bushnell not getting an award. That's not really groundbreaking progress.
So why should we vote for you?
I think that we need a generation of legislators that are informed on technology. This is not a bipartisan, this is a bipartisan issue. Cybersecurity is a huge threat to this country right now. Do you remember the Mirai botnet that took down most of the information infrastructure a couple of years ago? That was 2 teenagers essentially doing that. We've got to really double down and bet big on cybersecurity. So I think there's a litany of perspectives that are just not being heard by our current Congress, and we need new leaders.
All right, well, we are going to be following your campaign.
Thank you.
Brianna Wu, congressional candidate in Massachusetts, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always
Great
a pleasure.
to have you on the show, and thank you so much for your role in the book. All right, we're going to continue to address all the issues I cover in my book, Brotopia, throughout the week with voices like Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg, PayPal co-founder Max Levchin, and Megan Smith, former Google U.S. Vice President and CTO, right here on Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Broadcom ups the ante for Qualcomm, hoping to close what could be the largest ever tech deal. We'll have the latest next. This is Bloomberg. It's the latest development in the consolidation in the chip industry. Broadcom just offered Qualcomm shareholders a $16 billion bigger payday, raising its bid for Qualcomm to about $121 billion. The new offer of $82 a share is 17% higher than its opening proposal in November. Broadcom says this is the best and final offer. And joining us now, our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, who is in San Francisco. So is Qualcomm going to bite here?
It's hard to say here. I mean, the real problem here, I think, ultimately is regulatory. So the price getting higher, the price is already well above where the stock had been before Broadcom showed up with this kind of offer. The question is, are the regulators going to let this happen at all, even if the deal were to go ahead? It's not a pure cash deal, so fundamentally Broadcom shareholders or Qualcomm shareholders would have to believe that their very low stock would benefit, and I say that from any kind of valuation standpoint, that Broadcom shares would grow more in value than Qualcomm shares where they are right now. But even if that were the case, the long period of review by antitrust regulators, both in Europe and in the U.S., Europe might even be a greater concern, is reason for Qualcomm shareholders to at least take some time to consider this as to whether or not this is enough money. Because, again, the combination of stock and cash means they can't just take this cash to the bank. They've got to believe that there's a future in Broadcom's shares going forward.
Meantime, the landscape of the chip industry has shifted dramatically since Broadcom embarked on this potential takeover with these, chip flaws that have been so pervasive. Do you think that will factor into any kind of review of whether or not more consolidation is really good?
Well, what we've seen from the European authorities in particular over the last few months has been a real concern about consolidation in any technology market, and a sense that they seem to really understand these markets. And the things that we've heard from them, in particular a fight against Intel recently, showed us that the European regulators are very concerned about a lack of competition. I'm sorry, fine to Intel. A fine to Qualcomm showed us that they were concerned that Intel couldn't get into the market because Qualcomm had an illegal deal with Apple, according to European authorities. Well, that really shows us that they want more competition, not less, and that they're willing to enforce that competition. So the idea that they would take this merger out and take out one of the largest semiconductors in the world in Qualcomm, it flies in the face of that notion that what the Europeans have certainly espoused in terms of increasing competition. When you also look at the data set side, when you've got 99% of all data chips being sold by Intel, the consolidation in this market just isn't good for industry. It isn't good for diversity. It isn't good for innovation. That pure consolidation of any market just doesn't lead to the best stuff.
Meantime, Qualcomm is tangled up in lawsuits all over the world, including with Apple. And I'm curious if this takeover happens, does the status of those lawsuits change immediately?
Broadcom has made the point that they'll be able to get along where Qualcomm has not been able to get along. Purely by having a different sort of a chair in the CEO seat. Whether or not that's the case, there's absolutely no way to know that. It seems a little bit ridiculous on its face, but Qualcomm certainly, you have to understand this is a business that was really built with almost with litigation in mind. It is a business that was built around intellectual property, not manufacturing prowess, and as a result, it was always going to be dependent on its ability to negotiate with, fight with, even sue, if necessary, the companies that were using their chips and using their designs to make chips and make devices. So for Qualcomm to be in a fight is as old as Qualcomm itself.
All right, Corey Johnson, our editor at large, you are going to stick with us. We're going to talk to you a little bit more after this break. Coming up, we are tracking Bitcoin's biggest sell-off ever, falling below $7,000. We will discuss. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. At a manufacturing company in Ohio today, President Trump praised his recently passed tax overhaul law.
When I signed the tax cuts 6 weeks ago, it set off a tidal wave of good news that continues to grow every single day. Before the ink was dry, companies were announcing thousands and thousands of new jobs and enormous investments to their workers.
The clock is ticking toward another government shutdown deadline. At midnight on Thursday, House Republican leaders have scheduled a closed-door session for this evening. Speaker Paul Ryan and other leaders hope to pass a stopgap funding bill that could last another 6 weeks. And federal investigators spent a second day at the site of that deadly train crash in South Carolina, where an Amtrak train was mistakenly sent off a main track and into a parked freight train. Sunday's crash killed 2 people and injured more than 100. The National Transportation Safety Board admits the investigation could take years. Larry Nasser was sentenced now to a third prison term of 40 to 125 years. This comes in addition to a sentence of 40 to 175 years in another county and a 60-year federal term for child pornography. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, and we have more of Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang coming right up. Stay with us.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to one of our biggest stories, the fight between Waymo and Uber now in full swing. But just how did these two companies get to this point? Bloomberg Tech's Eric Newcomer takes a look.
A home healthcare provider, an AT&T lineman, and an optician. Those are just three of the jurors who will be deciding the most anticipated trial of the year. For Silicon Valley, that is. Waymo, the self-driving vehicle unit of tech giant Alphabet, versus the world's most valuable startup, Uber. Those jurors will be deciding if Uber stole secrets from Waymo in the race to get its own self-driving cars on the road. At stake for Uber, their program could come to an abrupt halt, and they could be forced to pay a whopping $2 billion fine. The jurors will have to decide if Uber stole the recipe to building driverless cars from Google when it bought the self-driving startup Otto. You see, Otto is full of former Google employees, most notably led by Anthony Levandowski. Before buying Otto, Uber investigators found that Levandowski kept a lot of his old Google emails. But did that material make its way to Uber? And did Uber use those alleged secrets to kickstart its self-driving unit? But the stakes go beyond the tech and the dollars. It could decide the future of recruiting talent in Silicon Valley, impacting how easy it is for engineers to leave one company to take their expertise to another. And the trial could be the equivalent of a Silicon Valley red carpet, with Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin possibly testifying. Infamous ex-Uber CEO Travis Kalanick is also expected to appear, as well as the man at the center of it all, Levandowski himself. We should know by March whether the jurors believe the search engine giant with the slogan "Do No Evil" or the rule-breaking ride-sharing upstart, whether secrets were stolen or if it is all just a case of hiring the right people.
That was Bloomberg Tech's Eric Newcomer with a look at Waymo versus Uber and the big trial. We're going to bring you all the latest news from that trial as proceedings continue. Now to the crypto market. Bitcoin continues its dramatic fall, trading below $7,000 earlier. It is a far cry off its all-time high of almost $20,000 in December. For more, let's bring in our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. So obviously there's a lot going on with the broader markets. What in particular brought Bitcoin down?
Well, Emily, we just did a marathon, Carol Master and I did on Bloomberg Radio, as the markets were really melting down today. And it was a very dramatic sell-off, really across the board, across all kinds of stocks, tech stocks, non-tech stocks, oil selling off, and yes, cryptocurrencies all selling off in concert, baby and bathwater. And I think what we saw is the notion that somehow Bitcoin would be a non-correlated asset. Well, that's clearly not the case here. When the sell-off was happening in all the markets today, Bitcoin was selling off as well. In fact, I thought one of the most interesting things was that gold, which was up just a little bit today, really separated. This notion that it was a store of value. If you go to my terminal right now, so the line in the white is the price of Bitcoin over the last month, and the gold-colored line with the blue. See, I made it gold, Emily, because it's gold. So I thought it'd be really clever if I made it gold. Gold's going up a little bit, Bitcoin's going down. And you see that, you can see that if I go to 3 days, we can change it to a little more extreme. You can see once again, gold showing some sort of resilience in a sell-off, and Bitcoin certainly is not. And I think what this shows is that this notion that something is a quote-unquote store of value only works if people think that it has some value. And I believe that the cryptocurrencies that don't have a function to them, that are merely meant to be a proxy for something possible or a proxy for a way to move money, but not an actual functioning case study, are always going to have this problem, because fundamentally it's about belief.
Talk to us about what happened with the wider cryptocurrency market, rival coins, Ripple, Litecoin, Ethereum, also feeling effects.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation many days over the course of the last few weeks, is that they really are trading all alike, but they certainly are not alike in the way these things are used. If you look at, for example, the way that transactions happen with the currencies that you mentioned, the transaction close times are all over the map. Ripple claims to do transactions in 3 to 5 seconds. Litecoin is doing them, and Ethereum doing them in 20 seconds, sometimes 20 minutes. Bitcoin can take over a day to get a transaction complete and cleared. So the technology technologies underlying these things are very different. The use cases ultimately are going to be very different in that the market's treating them all the same right now. And so until we have a better sense of what these things do, until the market gets smarter, they're going to continue to trade dumber. And the headlines are affecting these things, and that's not going to end. Tomorrow we've got the heads of the CFTC appearing before Congress talking about their desire to regulate some of the trading exchanges that have allowed some really disturbing trading patterns going on in the markets, in the market for these alternative cryptocurrencies. And if these come into a lot of people in the industry say, please regulate us so we can actually have a fair and orderly market for all the people that want to trade these things. But the short-term headlines, as we've seen, can be bad news for the cryptos.
We've also got some new statements from the SEC chair, as well as the credit card issuers halting purchases of cryptocurrencies. You know, is there a tide turning here? Are these things going to pile up and make things a lot more difficult for traders in this market?
I mean, you know, you weren't able to buy stocks with a credit card, so you weren't able to buy options with credit cards. So the notion you'd be able to buy these quote-unquote currencies for a credit card didn't seem like a likely thing. I think it was more of the point where the credit card issuers just didn't even think about the risks they were taking on here with these acquisitions and realized they had to do something different in terms of risk. But I think it's more a matter of just playing catch-up. And frankly, we see that across the board where regulators and banks and lots of industries are paying attention to the possibilities of blockchain, but also recognizing that it falls under their purview whether they want it to or not, whether it's a regulator or whether it's a bank or it's a credit card issuer.
And internationally, China blocking all websites, including foreign platforms related to cryptocurrency trading. This just continuing the steady anti-crypto drumbeat that we've been seeing from China. You know, it only seems to be going in one direction, if you will.
I don't know, though. As I talk to technologists, as we talk to venture capitalists, I mean, Emily, you talk to these people all the time. I mean, I can't think of a one who's really not excited about the possibility of blockchain and thinks of it as a different way to do things. Bitcoin might not be the answer, but it seems that venture capitalists I talk to and executives and technology companies are all looking at blockchain as a way to start to solve some real problems here. And I think this is really a case of the general public not quite getting it yet, but technologists really seeing an opportunity to do big things there. So I don't think this is going to go away.
All right, Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large, tracking the crypto craze and the sell-off today. Thanks so much, Corey. Well, ratings for America's biggest one-day sporting event declined for the third year in a row. The NFL Super Bowl showdown between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New England Patriots drew an overnight rating score of 47.4, according to preliminary data on NBC. That is down about 3% from last year. One bright spot, advertisers spent $414 million, the second most in Super Bowl history. Among the advertisers was tech giant Amazon, which was said to have spent about $15 million on its 92nd spot. Coming up, SpaceX gearing up for its largest rocket launch yet. How Elon Musk's latest rocket will impact the private space sector next. This is Bloomberg. Porsche is planning to spend $7.4 billion on electric cars by 2022. That is double the $3.7 billion previously estimated. Porsche's Mission E, capable of traveling 400 to 600 miles on a single charge, is expected in 2019. The starting price will be around $75,000, similar to the starting price of Tesla's Model S. Elon Musk is getting ready to launch the biggest rocket in SpaceX history. The Falcon Heavy is a reusable, super heavy launch vehicle that will allow the company to bid on heavier payloads like larger commercial satellites and national security missions. It could also one day send paying tourists on flights around the moon. The rocket is due to launch Tuesday afternoon. Joining us now to talk more broadly on the private space sector is Space Angels CEO Chad Anderson. Space Angels is the leading source of capital for space startups. So talk to us about the importance of success or failure with this particular mission.
Right. I think it's important to understand what that means and what constitutes a success.
expectations have been tempered. I think that success at this point is getting off the pad and away from the pad so that it doesn't damage the pad.
Even if it crashes, it's
even if
a
it crashes, even if it blows up, they're going to get a lot of important data, I think. Again, this is the first time that SpaceX has launched anything this large. It's the biggest rocket since the Saturn V in the Apollo era.
And if they can pull this off, what does that mean?
If it's anything less than a flawless orbit to Mars, inserting the Tesla with a man inside to Mars, I think it's going to give some of the people, some of the critics of SpaceX, some fodder. And additional ammo for them to go after them. I think if it's a success, what it does is it gives NASA an option, more options. I mean, something other than SLS, right? And something that costs a tenth of what it would cost to do it on the government rocket.
So, say it's less than flawless. Is the criticism warranted? Or do you think, any sort of experimentation here and innovation is a step forward?
I think the criticism is healthy, but I also think that we've stagnated in space for a long time. We went from launching our first satellite to launching our first human to putting boots on the moon, and then we slowly have been regressing since that point, down to low Earth orbit, to the shuttle, and now we don't even have the ability to take U.S. astronauts to low Earth orbit. So we're slowly getting back to that position of U.S. leadership in space. And this type of innovation is necessary in order for us to take this next step and realize our future.
So Elon Musk, speaking on a call today, echoed sort of what you've just said. This is a test mission, so we don't want to set expectations of perfection. I would consider it a win if it just clears the pad. Talk to us about the market for private launchers.
So it's an interesting dynamic because 16 years ago when SpaceX was first founded, there wasn't a market for launchers really at all. And the criticism was that there was only one customer and it was the government. And that's what we're hearing, the same sort of criticism today in this deep space missions. Why would you build such a large rocket? The only customer that's out there is the government. Well, when SpaceX first came on the scene, I mean, what they did was they realized, hey, there's a lot of money exchanging hands for satellite data. I can think of a lot of other uses for this data, and but why don't I see this being adopted more broadly in the market? Well, it has to do with the fact that launch is very expensive and there's no transparency, and so you don't know how much it costs to get to orbit.
You are the leading source of capital for space startups. Where is that capital going?
It's going across the board in space. In launchers specifically, SpaceX is one of 60 that we're tracking that have raised outside equity financing. And since 2009, when SpaceX had their first successful launch, we've seen almost $7 billion go into launchers alone. So we've seen money go into other sectors as well, satellites being one of them, and some of the more far-reaching things like resources in space and transportation to the moon and other planetary bodies as well.
Where are costs going down in space?
Across the board. And this is one of the big things, and SpaceX identified this early, and they said, there's no transparency in this market, and also the prices are extremely high. So by addressing those two barriers to entry, they really opened up the market, and they opened up the market in a big way for all kinds of satellites, new small constellations to come onto the market that are doing all kinds of amazing things.
So, of the big private spaceflight companies, whether it's SpaceX or Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic, all of their objectives are slightly different. But, how do they stack up right now against each other? Who's in the lead on what? Who's behind? Yeah,
so SpaceX is leading the charge. They've been leading the charge for a while. Blue Origin is doing some amazing things as well. They've been around for a lot longer than people give them credit for. They operated in stealth for a while. And they are also developing the infrastructure for space, the railways to get us to orbit and beyond. SpaceX is the first one to launch a rocket of this size. Blue Origin is nipping at their heels. Virgin Galactic is doing something a little bit different.
All right, Chad Anderson, CEO of Space Angels, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For stopping by. Of course, we will be covering this tomorrow. Coming up, Samsung's J.Y. Lee walks free after a year in prison for bribery. We head to Seoul for the latest next. This is Bloomberg. China's Dalian Wanda Group has agreed to sell a $1.2 billion stake in its cinema subsidiary, Wanda Film. This is Wanda Film's first major sale of shares to external investors after listing on the Shenzhen Bourse in 2015. A sale comes as the group's billionaire founder is selling off its assets from real estate to hotels to help pay down debt. Investing in Wanda could help Alibaba founder Jack Ma play a larger role in China's film industry, forecast to become the world's largest box office by 2020. In South Korea, Samsung Electronics heir J.Y. Lee is free to leave prison almost a year after he was detained in a bribery scandal. A high court suspended Lee's sentence and put him on probation for 4 years. He was the highest-profile business figure caught in a corruption probe that brought down former South Korean President Park Geun-hye. Joining us live from Seoul, Bloomberg's Stephen Engel. So, Stephen, this has happened with other Samsung executives who've been sentenced to time in the past. Is this just a show?
Well, that's the big question that a lot of people are asking right now. This is like ripping off a Band-Aid before the wound is fully healed for many South Koreans. They thought 6 months ago this cozy relationship between businessmen and politicians was finally, they turned a new page on that. They thought that when that district court in August handed down the 5-year prison sentence for various charges, including corruption and influence peddling with the now deposed president. But now, after this high court, the appellate court ruled yesterday that we're going to lower the sentence down to 2.5 years. He can walk free, and sure enough, he walked free from that Seoul detention center yesterday and gave a little sentence or a statement. He read from a paper basically saying he apologized for not showing his best side. The past year was a valuable time for looking inwards to himself. But at the same time, you know, he's going perhaps back to the company, and it could be business as usual again for the chaebol here in South Korea. So you do expect him to go back to the company and go back into an operating role? Because we've talked about the fact that Samsung hasn't seemed to have been affected. You know, when you look at the earnings, when you look at the products they're turning out, hasn't been affected. The business hasn't been affected by the scandal. Yeah. And he's going to just slot right back in? We don't know if he's going to go back in to the same kind of role he had. Keep in mind, they put new division heads, including a new CEO, the former semiconductor chief at Samsung. They put new leadership at the end of the third quarter. And you're right, the company has been doing great. They had record full-year earnings. The fourth quarter was gangbusters. It didn't meet expectations from analysts, but still a very good number in chips and in mobile phones and screens. We don't know if he's going back to the company, but keep in mind, as you rightfully said, Emily, at the top, other past chairmen or heads of companies, including Lee's father, Lee Kun-hee, they have been convicted of various crimes. They were all given suspended sentences and went right back to their company. I think there'll be a cooling off period, see how the public reacts to this. And then going forward, the people that we're speaking to say this could be bad for activist investors who perhaps want change within the company. They could go on a big, massive acquisition spree. They could do what they want at the expense of the minority shareholders. That's what some of the worst case scenario, according to some of the analysts we've spoken to, could pan out to be.
All right. Well, Stephen, I know you're going to keep watching this for us. Bloomberg's Stephen Engel from Seoul. Thanks so much. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, tune in all this week as we explore the themes I write about in my new book, Brotopia, Breaking Up the Boys Club of Silicon Valley. We will be hearing from Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg, PayPal co-founder Max Levchin, and Megan Smith, former Google Vice President and White House CTO, throughout the week right here on Bloomberg Technology. I am so excited to bring you all of these interviews. And we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.